Sean Penn is said to be one of those people in which there's a direct line between Marlon Brando and him because of the authenticity of performances on film. Sean Penn was Marlon Brando's great friend, and I am so pleased that he joins us this evening to remember his friend, Marlon Brando. Just talk to me about him, because you two are linked in some, not only because we're deep friends, but also because people look at this craft of acting and they see some direct connection, straight line from him to you that crosses generations.
You know, there's the thing I thought of immediately with him, and I thought of it always, and I think all of the other people that I know that know him or admire him agree about it, but particularly those who know him, Johnny Depp and the other actors that I know that he was a fan of and cared about, and is that, you know, it's like the line about, you know, talking about Marlon is like dancing about architecture.
Yes.
Yes. We would tell the stories would be rich, everybody would laugh a lot,
yeah,
and then say, where does it come from?
Yeah. And where does it come from?
Oh, I don't know. I think, you know, that there'll be a lot of theories expressed in the next couple of days. I always imagine a little boy sitting in the weeds by a picket fence, fleeing alcoholism with an imagination that took him somewhere else. And that imagination developed into, you know, the greatest poetic actor that ever lived.
Poetic actor.
I think of him that way. I think, you know, I thought in the past, and anyone that reads Streetcar Named Desire will read a play about Blanche Dubois, but to see Marlon in it, something else. And this isn't because it's an actor serving himself instead of a play. It's because even the greatest writer of art of that time couldn't rise to the poetry of this creature that was Marlon Brando. And it overwhelms things, and yet gives one a gift on the level of any of the great plays.
Do you know where it comes from within you? Or do you think he knew where it came from within him?
You know, I would say that you know, he's going to see and hear everything I say now, and I just would be so embarrassed at his reaction of my trying to analyze that.
No, I know. I tell you, on the phone, I said, whenever I would have a conversation with an actor, he would call me up and say, why are you doing that? Yeah. And if I had a conversation with a scientist, he would say, that's what you ought to be doing. You ought to be talking to more scientists.
He felt that way.
Yeah. Why was that?
Well, I think that, you know, that Marlon deeply, you know, some of this poetry relates to a human sensitivity. Most of it does. And I think that he was, in his strengths and in his flaws, on the extreme level of sensitivity to the concerns of other people in the world. They talk about actors as observers, and there was nobody like him as an observer. You know, he knew what all 10 flies in the room were doing and thinking while he was talking to you.
Yes. When you sat down, you have a little hole in your shoe that you cut because it was...
I had a sore in your toe.
So you cut a little hole in your shoe. Yeah. You saw him recently.
Yeah, this is just a week ago, and we were in his room where the light was very dim, and from 12 feet away, he was in the middle of talking about something else, and he says, what's that hole in your shoe, you know? And I don't know another 80-year-old man who sees a tiny little hole in a black shoe with a black sock underneath it at 12 feet.
Yeah.
In it, you know.
When you think about the times you've spent together, what were they like?
A lot of laughing. Because there's something...
And kidding.
A lot of laughing, a lot of kidding, and a lot of... You know, he could talk pretty good. And a lot of that was relative to observations, either of things in the room or things outside the room. And his observations were so acute that he might as well be pantsing everybody on the street. So it's like, you know, look at that guy. Because he would open the person up and it would acknowledge an awareness that you had, but you had it subconsciously.
Yeah.
And he was able to articulate it with that voice and those eyes, that just made you part of it.
He used to always say to me, you sit there every night and you're learning everything. You're learning all this stuff. What are you going to do with it? And he was forever saying, every conversation almost, what are you going to do with it? As if, well, I should be taking this experience, sitting with you and people who come here every night. There ought to be something coming out of it other than sharing it with a larger community.
There was a pattern of that particular, I think, almost obsessive pattern of that, which relates to his concern for people and his admiration for people, which that would have expressed toward you, in his own desire to find purpose in those things that he understood, perhaps more deeply than most. He wanted to find a way where it would show something productive. I think that his involvements in social issues, as well as his involvement in motion pictures and the theater, always came back to him as a challenge of, well, what is it ultimately adding up to if things are still so ugly in so much of what happens in the world? And so that there was and then he would reemerge and try again. But I think to be that curiosity about, well, what do others do with that, and where can we make it really mean something? Was the one side of Marlon, which he would pursue, and when he did it, he gave things that last forever. And the other part of him was, now I've done that, and everybody said rah rah rah, but there's still so much pain around, and I think that he was constantly torn about purpose.
He, with you, because you knew him so well, and I think it comes out of what you just said, I once said to him, I asked him a lot to come have a conversation with me. He said no a lot. And I kept trying and always wanted him to do it. On the other hand, I would say to him, if you have contempt for what you do, I don't want to do this. I have no interest in doing this. And we would have dialogue about this, how he felt. What do you think he felt about acting?
Oh, I think he was extremely appreciative of it. I know he was, because I would hear him talk about the actors he loved. I would hear him talk about Johnny Depp. I would hear him talk about Daniel Day-Lewis and Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, and you. But those are all have what in common? I mean, what does it say about him that those are people that...
He had a great love for the art. I think that one of the things that's going to happen in these next days, and I sort of sadly anticipated it, is that there's going to be a revisiting of some of those things where, I think he'd been taken for granted at a certain point. Of course he's great. It's Marlon. There were amazing performances like Apocalypse Now, which, almost across the board was attacked. And now they have to sit back without the threat of him pantsing them and see that once again some of the greater public, both in terms of his social concerns and his work, are going to have to review it and see what incredible gifts he left us with. I think there's this that we forget often when we talk about, this is the first time talking about someone who's done what he did and what he did. But, movies are an extremely new art form still today, if you relate it to painting or music or any of these other things. And music's not going to get better than Tchaikovsky, and painting's not going to get better than Da Vinci or Rembrandt. And acting's not going to get better than Marlon Brando. That ultimate poem's been written.
I really think that.
Infinite will be the amount of humanity that we have, that he offered on screen. Why can you watch Last Tango in Paris over and over again? I don't care if you watched it on a constant loop since it came out. There'll be more discovery, and it's that kind of ultimate depth, and that kind of, there was a sensuality of his personality, there was the masculinity of his personality, and there was the heart. And as he would pants another, he pantsed himself. And that was that's where his generosity shined.
Do you think he was plagued by expectation? That somehow people had, as you suggested earlier, because of his gifts and because of what he had done so early, that everybody had their own idea of what he was and what he ought to do?
Well, of course, there's that. I think there's also the practical reality of filmmaking, which has an awful lot of chefs in that kitchen, and so much of the beauty of what he did, I think, was in hungrier times and so on. He being fueled by the rage against that machine doesn't deplete immediately. It doesn't deplete the talent. It doesn't deplete the willingness to share the talent, or the belief that's of value to share. I think after a period of time, you want to feel. You don't need to have, as he proved. You can still, that talent can still grow, but you want to feel some food coming back in. And he's one of the great examples of the way that this culture ultimately treats their geniuses, maybe not so well. But it's a two-way street.
How so?
He knew how to burn a bridge pretty good. and I think that the same way in which things were expected of him in an exaggerated way, he probably came to expect a tolerance, because he was the canary in the coal mine. And so when he came up, he didn't want to have to give them a bath. It was time for them to give him a bath and get the coal dust off him.
But I think of him and you. You have, and you've talked to me about this before, things just converged for you in the last several years. A whole combination of things reflected in Mystic River and other performances. I mean, somehow you went from a period of an earlier time of rage about acting to a point where things converged in terms of scripts and opportunities, and you feeling that you were at the height of your power.
I hear a giggle from above saying,
what is he doing?
He's going to make you talk about yourself now. Ha ha ha. And I'm not going to do it.
That's exactly what he would say. He would say, I know what he's doing. I've watched him.
Oh, yeah. He knows you very well.
No, probably ways I don't want to know. But he says, continuing, what did he give you? What was you?
I started early on this friendship saying, I'll be sycophant, I'll be pal, I'll be co-worker, I'll be, he had given so much before I ever met him. Just, in the way that he created an excitement about the work that I and we in this business do. And also, made it very clear that there are no limits to how you can share that human experience with other people and through acting. So, as it turned out, we had things in common and struck up, what I might say most valuably was a great friendship. And so he gave me the things that a great friend gives you. He gave, concern and laughter and I,
compassion, understanding.
Yes.
motivation.
Yeah, encouragement.
Encouragement. Wisdom.
All of the above.
And when you should be admonished, would he admonish you?
Yeah, we had our periods of riff.
Riff?
Yeah, there were times where it's, hey, it's Sean.
Is that right?
Sure.
Just boom.
Yeah. Yeah, but then, you'd give it a month and
you call up and say...
Well, then my wife would answer the phone at 2:30 in the morning. It's Marlon.
You take care of this.
That's right. Because he was up watching you the second running.
I know. And he would say, you take care of it. I mean, can I tell you, at a moment like this, I wish I'd kept every voicemail that I had of one of those calls saying,
Yeah.
He used to sign notes to me as Bran Flakes.
Bran Flakes.
Was that what he used with?
Bran Flakes here. Yeah.
Bran Flakes here.
Yeah. I think that in some way he'd come to look at his own name as a cliche, and so he futzed with it. Yeah. The last big laugh I got out of him was when I had checked into a hotel here as Molly Ringwald.
Just to know the names you have used.
And I won't use it again. But when he got that news, he left me. He was in stitches and said, I've never used a girl before. But those kinds of little things, he was, that speaks to the playful humor he had. Those were the things that would get him crying on the floor.
Oh, that's great. But you know what else it speaks? It speaks to somebody who's alive. Who's alive.
Yeah.
If he notices both observant and alive. I mean, it's just not a name. I mean, it says.
And he was so alive until he's not now. Obviously leaving behind an awful lot, but yeah, he lived it, though uncomfortably at times, to the end. His mind was sharper than mine will ever be, right to the end, and so
there were so many people. Just think of the 4 you named, or 3 you named: Johnny, Jack, Daniel, Day Lewis, and I see those all, have a certain quality as an actor. Could you guys not get him, not find a way to bring him back to the stage?
The stage?
No, I mean film.
Yeah, the stage. Last time I did a play, he called me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm doing a play." He said, "That would for me be like summoning up the Inquisition." But yes, no, and I tried, and he was game to do it. I think he wanted to know that financial people would treat him respectfully, and he wanted something that he would sink his teeth into. It wasn't, there's going to be a lot of tributes to Marlon,
right?
But it's silly to say Hollywood ever, because Hollywood at large is a lot of different things. But it was not easy to finance a movie that he would be the lead in towards the end. People will waste money on a lot of stuff, but they won't spend money on the time it takes for an actor like that to create what he creates. And a lot, I think we lost a lot that's not where the finger can't be pointed squarely at Marlon. I know that we did.
I'm sure we did. Absolutely. I mean, you could put the finger at him at a lot of things. I mean, he bears responsibility significantly.
Yeah.
He does.
But on the other hand, this is also somewhat our greed, because it's there. You pick one of so many of the movies, and it's time capsule enough to share, for me to share with my kids what was so important about him. It would have been nice to have had more paintings to hang in the museum, but but nobody's going to get bored looking at the Mona Lisa if that's all they got.
And seeing something different every time they look.
Yeah.
You have mentioned several times that there will be all kinds of tributes. They began here, they're everywhere, and then since the word came over people, then we knew we'd be talking about Marlon. Because people say this: there was acting before Marlon and there was acting after Marlon. After they saw him, after he was on the stage, after he was on film. Tell me what that means.
Well, it's funny, because I talked to Marlon, there was acting before Paul Muni, and there was acting after Paul Muni.
Yeah.
For me, I can't be analytical about it, but I can say that I think this would have been true if a student said of their professor Marlon, there was learning before Marlon, there was learning after Marlon. If he was, it was who he was an actor, was a poem.
He was a poem.
Yeah, and he lent it mostly to acting. But he was a writer. He wrote his dialogue in Last Tango in Paris. That he didn't write it all on paper, he just let you see him write it. But you're not going to find that dialogue in the original text of that screenplay. That's Marlon writing that. And it's some of the greatest character writing dialogue that's ever been written for a contemporary character. He had it in so many ways. He had it, he was an inventor. He was, and not an inventor without some really interesting ideas. And that's why his interest in science, and he pursued a lot of scientists to flesh out some of the ideas that he had. He was a force of nature, that we're lucky to have when it comes along once in a while, and he just happened to lend that to acting mostly.
I listened to you, and it seems to me that you're, there's a heaviness in your sense because of your personal loss, and you feel that almost rather than speaking about, because he's up there watching, other than speaking about all the things that everybody else is going to write about. They're all going to write about the greatest actor of all time. And they're also going to write about the fact that you are the inheritor. You are the inheritor. You don't.
Well, I mean, Marlon said that at times, and but he knew best to say it also about some of the people I just mentioned. I think that, we get some really great people out there today, and they would all say the things that I'm saying. Johnny would if he were sitting here, Daniel would, Jack would. I think, that we didn't learn how to act like him, because that would be a futile mission. But I think that he unveiled the level that you have to at least try to unveil in yourself as an actor, and it was almost like there were times in conversations with him where he would go into fiction, but there was a seamless transition, and the fiction was a setup for a joke or a prank or some way in which you were going to be suckered. But you didn't see a change in the eyes at all. My wife will always tell me, you always go to half-mast when you're going to tell a lie or a joke. Marlon didn't. He was right there.
So when you're going to lie, she can tell. But with Marlon, he was that good of an actor, so there was no change.
Yeah, he felt that it was all the truth and all a lie, and so there was no kind of self-consciousness in that transition.
Did he feel despair about his life?
Of course he had, incredible miseries. He spoke about some of them, publicly.
Yeah, but I don't mean the things that are so public and obvious. I mean, anybody who has lost to family, that carries deep and deep and never goes away?
I mean, I saw it again just last week when I saw him. You know, it was a very buoyant conversation to the degree that he could have when he was having trouble breathing. But when he spoke about things that he disdained, it wasn't with an anger, it was with a kind of, it reminded me in a way, and what he was talking about was certain political liars on television. And he just couldn't watch it anymore. And it felt a lot like there's a moment in Last Tango where he runs after the lover of his dead wife, beats him up in an alley. Beats this guy up in an alley. And then you see him just sort of disgusted with himself, and it just becomes sadness instead of anger. And I think that the things that happened in the world that were painful affected him in a way that you could call despair. On the other hand, the things, you know, he could talk about, you know, having a hummingbird feeder outside your window. And to then, no matter how close, to then also get a set of binoculars by your bed. And you hear him talk with incredible joy about being alive when he talked about those things. And he meant it. You know, he had, this is where he had a kind of patience for letting himself see things that I think many of us take for granted, and the kind of the electricity with which he spoke about those things, you know, did sort of lead you to go out and watch an ant line for 2 or 3 hours. They marched along. Say, that, if I look at that long enough, can I act like you?
Can I act like you, the ant? When you talked to him a week ago, did you know it was close to the end?
Yeah, he was. He'd been having some trouble for a couple of years, and on oxygen and so on, and so he was in worse shape, but I'd heard him in worse shape before. I'd not necessarily seen him in worse shape, but heard him on the telephone where he was having a tougher time talking, and then he'd make these big comebacks. But it was the first time that he said that he thought he might not beat it. And so while it's a surprise that it's today, I think, yesterday, I think probably least of all a surprise to him, he would have, one sensed he would have known it was coming.
There's something about genius that, as far as you know, that makes life that much more complicated because you see it more clearly, you see everything, through a different kind of prism.
You read the biographies of these guys, it seems like it's a rougher thing. A friend of mine had a thing he used to do, which I've since borrowed, not accusing myself of the genius of this friend of mine, but he'd walk through the lobby of a hotel with a grim look on his face, and somebody would say, why don't you ever smile? And he'd say, it's tough knowing this much. But Marlon... Marlon knew that much, and he did smile,
You miss him a lot. Not being able to get a phone call at 2:30 saying, it's you.
Yeah, I think we'll all miss him.
You sure will. Is there anything that ought to be said that the conventional wisdom doesn't say, that ought to be said that at this time, because you're here and I'm here, and I'm deeply in your debt to come at a time like this, to share this, that that we don't know. I mean, we know that the greatness of an actor. We know some of the demons that he had. We know of the frustrations. We know because of you of the insights he had about stuff. Anything that we should add to this portrait?
These things are going to come out along the way. It's a funny moment, this is all, going to be, here I am talking about it, and people are going to be talking about this a lot these next days. But, I think finally what he had to share, even privately, because of the nature of the work that he did and what he left behind, is there to be revealed for everybody, not just those of us who are, had the great fortune to know him. But, that was circumstantial and certain luck on commonalities, but, and the same job description and so on. But, he had, he had that friendship to offer everybody, and it's in the movies. And he had that care, and he had that love for people, and his family. And it's going to be interesting to see how it registers in the culture. I was thinking coming in here today. What's going to be interesting is I think that some younger people are going to go out and get some of his pictures now.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And I think it's a good time for people to touch base with anything that had a revolutionary sense of truth. And he certainly had that.
A revolutionary sense of truth. Thank you.
You bet.
Great to see you.
Thanks.
Sean Penn.